What's up, Call of Duty fans? Welcome back to Checkmate Gaming. My hold shift with the day 2 recap for what's been going on at CDL Seattle. A lot of games to get through, so let's just dig straight in. We're not going to go in necessarily broadcast order, but we'll go group by group, starting with our first qualifier match from Group A. London, who had some shaky moments versus the Los Angeles Guerrillas, playing up against the New York Subliners, who had really no problem whatsoever with the Seattle Surge. This would be a revenge battle for Zero, who's in the lineup for London. Again, previously was on New York, got dropped, got picked up now by what's happening at London. And how would things go today? I was initially thinking that New York would have no problem with this matchup. London's still trying to figure themselves out a touch, but beyond that, would they be able to meet up against the fast, aggressive pace that New York was able to set? The answer would be yes. Pretty straight on. Gunrunner, all the way through our first 3 maps, all of it would turn up in favor of London for a 3-0. A 250 to 180 on the first hard point. A little bit surprising as New York was getting out-rotated. Zero was playing extremely well still with Dylan up front. And the same would be the case again in the middle of the map with the SMGs for London on the Search and Destroy Gunrunner, a 6-3 there. And as you see it, a tighter affair on the domination, but London, surprising. I think a lot of people, not just because they won this matchup, but how convincingly they were able to do it. The first 2 maps were, I won't say blowouts, but they were pretty easily won. For the domination, good pace set for London. They kept themselves an edge, and New York just could not find a way to get things back together near the end of the map. Very interesting to see how things would go. Then we jump down to our first elimination matchup, Seattle versus LAG. We talked about Enable playing just the hard points and the domination yesterday. It was Pander in the Search and Destroy. That would not be the case today. It would be Pander all the way through the series. And this is an interesting conversation point. We'll sit with it for a moment. It's one of those things that, what was the preparation going into these changes for Seattle? And if you saw Pander and Enable talking on Twitter, the preparation was not to ever put Enable back on the bench. It was Search and Destroy and CDL playlist all the last couple of weeks for Pander. It was all scrims for Enable. Things would not look very good for this next swap up, though, putting Enable back on the bench and bringing Pander into the full starting roster. LAG with Vivid, who was a monster all the way through the day, would find themselves the win here. The Ramaza 250 to 217. Again, Vivid, incredible performance all the way through. The Search and Destroy has been where LAG has been good and where Seattle has been atrocious. That would be the case. Vivid again, sniping his absolute mind off. 6-1 the score for the Piccadilly. The only thing that would end up going the way of Seattle was the domination on Hackney Yard, which LAG, still with Vivid playing well, they were in the mix all the way through. It looked like they might be able to close things out, but Seattle just able to kind of finish off that fourth quarter better than LAG could. So we'd go to a map 4, but it was all Guerrillas all over the place on the Hackney Yard hardpoint. This Los Angeles Guerrillas team, they finally snapped the losing streak versus Seattle. It would have been 5 in a row if they dropped this one, but for Seattle, what in the world do you do now? You've got one of the best players in the league on your team of Octane. Apathy has played well. This was not one of those weekends necessarily for him, but Karma and Slacked have just been okay throughout the year, and then who knows what's going on with their 5th player. A lot of question marks for Joey Nubsy and the management team of Seattle to figure out what they want to do, but that, of course, would put LAG up against the New York Subliners for the last qualifier. In this one, New York would just be able to dominate through the respawns as you thought they might. 250, 191 in the first Gunrunner for New York. Not much of a problem there as they, again, were just out-rotating and playing the trades, going from the middle of the map most specifically better than LAG were, especially going from 3 to 4 to 5. That rotation looking extremely good for New York. They take a 250, 191, but the Search and Destroy, Vivid again, finding extra snipes. Able to get the Arklov peak going for the Guerrillas. 6-3 the score there with a very early lead for them. Domination, though, Mac pops for 31, 158, 149 for New York. St. Petro, the map 4. Zuma for 40. A scary start for New York, but they end up rolling through this one, 250 to 187. New York makes it into the playoff with London. But before we talk about the playoffs, let's go into Group B. This is actually where we started the day, Minnesota versus Chicago. I framed up Minnesota on a pedestal going into this matchup. I thought for sure they're going to have no problem with Chicago, who again, I think even though they played it very, very well yesterday when they played up against Paris, it was against Paris. And Optic Gaming fought through Minnesota. It was 2 round 11s that had him in the Search and Destroy. Minnesota just a little bit more gall. I had more favor built in for the Rocker, but You might want to call him the Minnesota Choker instead of Minnesota Rocker, because this entire series, there were moments where, even in, not just this series, but the entire day, where Minnesota should have closed maps out, but could not do it. Pristini started off 10-5 on the Azir Cave. Envoy had big moments in the fourth hill, giving Chicago a huge lead, but Minnesota was able to claw their way back in. Minnesota tries to extend it from P5 to P1, trying to get to a second cave hardpoint. Would not get there. Chicago cleaned things up 252-33. A super scrappy SMG battle, middle of the map for the Gunrunner Search and Destroy for both squads. Alex was able to pull off a 1v4 technically in the middle of the map, and Minnesota would go up 5-3. But the Minnesota Choker came out. Formal would wake up, helping out with Envoy, as trades were just not coming through for Minnesota. They dropped 3 in a row and lose the round 11 6-5. Then domination. Great first half on Hackney Yard for Chicago as they flipped the A side flags 2 different times. And in the second half, when they had the A side in their favor, not anything that Minnesota could do to break through. So a 3-0 for Chicago, getting them into the playoff and sending Minnesota to the losers bracket. Optic Gaming versus Paris would be our first one up, and Luca and Kismet had an incredible first map on Azir Cave. Around 40 kills. I think it was 39 and 41 for each of them, as Optic Gaming could not fully get past that point. So 251-75 start for Paris, but from there on out, it was the slasher show. Optic Gaming LA looked incredible through the Ramaza Search 6-4, the Hackney Yard Dom 170-143, and then a tight Ramaza. But Ramaza has not been Optic Gaming's best map since their Chino swap in. So the fact that they were still able to take down a good Paris team there definitely says a lot. So Minnesota versus Optic Gaming LA. And Minnesota found ways to choke maps again. Azir Cave picked again for Minnesota. And again, Minnesota had a big lead that they could not fully secure. 250-241. Maybe it's time to pick a new map for Hardpoint if you're Minnesota, because things have not been going well for you there. They didn't even show up at all in the Azir Cave Search and Destroy. 6-2 for Optic. And the domination, Minnesota once again not able to lock things down from the A side of the map. We saw that versus Chicago. It happened once again here versus Optic. No breaks whatsoever on the A flag. 171-157. Optic with a 3-0 win versus the Minnesota Rockers. So now we go into our playoffs, and this is where things get a little bit interesting, mostly because of the matchups that we have. I'm looking specifically at the London versus Optic Gaming matchup. That is going to be, I think, the easier matchup in the mix. Personally, I think Optic takes this one. They're the stronger team, I think, right now, even though London did find a 3-0 versus New York earlier today. I don't see them repeating that performance again and again. Again, you got to remember they went map 5 versus LAG, and that was a sloppy set, I think, for a lot of those respawn maps specifically, and Optic have looked very good in the respawn so far. Yeah, they had a 10-point loss on domination to Minnesota Rocker, but past that, their domination has been pretty solid all the way through. All of their losses have been relatively close, but the better news here for Optic is your Search and Destroy have either been wins or round 11s that you've lost in the last handful. And for London, that's one of their points of contest where they either look very good or very bad when it comes to the Search and Destroy. Their respawn has been better this weekend, but it's been against LAG and New York, who I don't think was really fully awake for their first set versus London, or their second set versus London in the winner-sided bracket. So good things here, and I have Optic Gaming getting through this one 3-1. So that gets Chicago versus New York. This is an interesting one. They played each other at the Chicago home series, and Chicago did win that the last time they played. But this, again, that was a tough weekend for New York, and a really proving one, as they had to go through Chicago twice and Atlanta once. And I honestly think this Chicago team, yes, they're looking strong, but I honestly feel like New York has more diversity built into their roster at the current moment, as they're still trying to get Pristini up to speed in Chicago. So I think New York actually takes this one, and we've got a New York versus Optic Gaming finals, and from there, I think it's going to be a very close contested match. We have yet to see those two teams play together, but I think that there are a lot of different things you can throw on for all of these different matchups that we have, but I like what I've seen from New York, especially what they were able to do versus LAG in the bounce back matchup, especially when they were down in some of the respawns early. The gall for them to fight back. I just don't know if Chicago has that composure yet, and I think New York puts them up for a pretty good test. So it's going to be a really good one, but I think definitively I've got Optic Gaming taking a 3-1 at worst versus London, who, yes, they look good today, but I don't think they repeat that same style of performance with a very alert and very ready-to-go Optic team, which you figure they will be. We'll be back with the Day 3 recap, giving you our final reactions on Seattle, so make sure you subscribe on your way out. And until the next one, hope you guys keep holding it down. Enjoy the games tomorrow. So long.